We do rely on brokers pretty heavily. There is no scientific process, for doing it. When we look back to all the deals we've done and sort of how they got sourced, etc., there's a little bit of a pattern, but not much. I mean, I won't say it's random, but it comes from all different places, and some people we've known, for a long time. Some people we don't really know. So that part's pretty interesting. We also sometimes will retain a broker and say, "Here's what we're looking for. Please go look for this on our behalf," and you will represent us, in those transactions. That works probably better for when you're buying existing assets than when you're buying a development opportunity.
Hey guys, welcome to another podcast of How I Did This. Today I have Brad Blake. Brad Blake is a real estate investor with more than 35 years of experience. He's the founder of Griggs Properties, which is a real estate development firm in Danville, California, that manages and operates commercial, mixed use, and residential properties. And we're going to be talking about how he's got to where he's at today. He's got a pretty interesting story, so we'd love to talk about it. Brad, how you doing today?
Good. Nice to see you, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be to be interviewing you, and thank you for being so generous with your time. So basically, how we start off this podcast is, we ask our guests, what have you done, based on your perspective. So let us know a little bit about what you've done here so that we can start off the podcast in a way after dissecting what you've done in the past.
Sure. So for 35 plus years, it's kind of a long story, but I'll try to keep it to some quick bullet points. When I got out of business school in 1985, I went to work for the Trammell Crow Company, which was a commercial real estate developer based in Dallas, but I worked out of the Menlo Park, San Francisco Bay Area office. And then we became a company called Speaker Partners, and then ultimately became a public company called Speaker Properties. And I ran the retail division for Speaker Properties. We sold that division after about a dozen years after going public. And then I went and became the CEO and chairman of a public real estate investment trust that did retail properties called Western Investment Properties Trust in the San Francisco Bay Area. And ultimately, we sold that company to one of our competitors. I mean, technically, it was a merger, but really more of a sale. They took over our portfolio in the Western states. And at that time, I then started my own company with a partner, Jerry Hunt. It was called Blake Hunt Ventures, and we became a developer of suburban infill, high-density retail properties in the San Francisco Bay Area. We ran that company for about 10 years, and then I formed Blake Griggs Properties with my partner, Brad Griggs, in about 2011. And since then, we have been developing, acquiring, and operating primarily multifamily, mixed use, and secondarily retail properties. And that brings me to where I am today.
Amazing. I love the story. Very concise, but very jam-packed. So as of right now, do you have a number of how many properties or I guess valuation size of what you guys have developed in the last, or in total?
So my partner and I, both together and separately through prior companies, have developed about $4.8 billion worth of commercial real estate and residential real estate and some hotels over the past 35 to 40 years, all over the United States, but with a focus in the Western states and primarily California. And then together, we've developed about $2.5 billion of properties in various locations, primarily in California.
Amazing. That's incredible. So your focus is mainly on developing properties. I always ask this, but was it always your intention to become a developer, or how'd you get into this field?
My intention was to become a professional basketball player, but I was a 6 foot tall white guy, and that didn't quite work out. Even though I had a passion for basketball, sort of being facetious, but I really knew nothing about real estate and development until I was in business school in the early to mid '80s, and a couple of my good friends from college went to work for Trammell Crow Company a year or so ahead of me. They introduced me to it, and I met some people at Crow, and I really liked it, and I liked the whole nature of the real estate business in general and real estate development and investment in particular. So there was no grand plan from the time I was a young kid or anything. I really was pretty clueless, and just serendipity, led to good opportunity.
Okay, that's awesome. So it seems like you kind of stumbled into this, and now that you have this experience, for people that are looking to get into this space, what is the what is the pathway that you recommend to getting into the space?
I'd say first of all, you have to have tremendous persistence and patience. It's not an easy business to get into. Now, real estate in general, I mean, that's a pretty broad industry and business, so it depends on what part you're talking about. But if you're talking about on the real estate development or investment side or working for a fund, for example, that's much more challenging. And I would say, unlike many other businesses in different industries, there's not a sort of annual hiring mandate where they just hire hundreds or thousands of people and train them and then see what happens over the first few years. I think it's really a just in time hiring business. And a lot of it is relationships and networking and having tremendous persistence and being, opportunistic and being able to respond to that opportunity when it arises. It's also a very people oriented business, so you're not going to get into the real estate business. I don't think typically going on job websites or just posting your resume on the internet. You really have
Yeah.
to make direct contact with people in order to get into the business.
Okay. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, it is a people heavily relying business. What do you recommend on that note? I know that a lot of people getting into real estate or maybe other fields um, know that this is a people business, but they don't necessarily have a manual on like how to go
Correct.
about going about meeting people or rebuilding relationships with people. Now, being in this field for 35 years, I'm sure you've picked up quite a few skills or traits that maybe you can talk about or discuss that may give people a little bit of understanding of how to do this, how to how to do that.
I'd say there's a number of different avenues. One is just start researching on the internet different real estate companies. Look for some common threads. Maybe there's someone who went to the same college you went to, or someone who grew up in the same town you grew up with, or you see on their in their bio they have some interest in a certain sport or hobby or activity or something, and just start contacting people, literally cold calling them, and have a quick pitch, that you can tell them. I'd also suggest attending conferences and just networking. I mean, really, it's a numbers game and also a sort of a quality game, and you're really just meeting people, and you're not asking for a job, right? You're just being inquisitive and trying to find out about the industry, about them, about their company, and one thing leads to another, and it's just sort of a viral networking type of thing. I think LinkedIn can be a huge help, since that's come to the fore in the last decade or so of going on there and searching for real estate. But there's no magic process really, and there is no manual or anything like that. So it's really just time, effort, and having a little intuitive, smarts as to sort of how to approach people and try to find the right people.
Amazing, amazing. All right. So incredible. I'm glad we got that out the way. Let's talk a little bit about what you do. So basically, what do you do? Like when it boils down, like what is it the work that you do? Like how do you get a deal done? Like, how do you make money?
Yeah. My family asked me the same thing. So I remember when my daughter was in elementary school, they had to say what their dad did for a job, and she said, "Well, he talks on the phone and he eats cookies." And so it's a little bit more advanced than that, but
Uh-huh.
I get involved in a little bit of everything. I was really trained in the business as a generalist. That's what Trammell Crow and Ned Speaker believed in. And so I've done everything from, property management to financial analysis to sourcing properties to sourcing capital to getting entitlements to negotiating construction contracts to negotiating retail leases to managing um, residential property management companies. And
Hmm.
so the one thing I love about the business is it's different every day. I mean, that's kind of a cliche that people talk about, but I'm involved in helping uh, create new development projects or new investment opportunities, talking to people in the capital markets, talking to city staff and elected officials about prospective projects or policy they have for the city, doing financial analysis, working with architects, lawyers, everything. So we're really almost like the producer of a movie where we get
Hmm.
involved in every single element of it. Others have used the analogy in the past of being the director of a symphony.
Mm.
Where you're standing in front and helping everybody sort of succeed and play their part.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, so as I understand development, you first have to find a plot of land that you're going to develop, but then you work with the city officials because they have regulations about the zoning of the city. And then obviously you got to make the plans, right? And there's different people that go on board into that, but once you have those plans, you got to source capital for it. You got to source the debt, like the equity, the capital. You got to, I guess you said, negotiate with the contractors who are actually going to do the work, right? And then you got to manage this whole process, from end to finish. So there's a lot that goes into it. Um, when people are getting into it, is it better to become a generalist right away, or is it better to niche and like become a capital raiser, or do something?
Yeah, I would say if you're asking about people sort of first getting into the industry or just getting in, period, you really do have to have a niche and a special skill. No one's going to hire you to be a generalist because you don't
Mm-hmm.
know anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like saying I'm going to go get a job in a restaurant and never worked in a restaurant, but I want to run the restaurant. I want to do everything, right? You don't really
Mm-hmm.
know how to do everything. So in real estate, I mean, probably the classic entry type position in development or investment is as an analyst. So you have financial analysis skills, which is something you can learn or teach yourself, or learn it when you're in college or business school, and you have a tangible skill that is of value to someone. Other areas are people go into brokerage, where it's leasing or sales, and they have the ability to sell, and they focus on that. And ultimately, if they want to broaden out and be in, say, development or investment, they at least have a good basis. They've made contacts, they have a network, they have market knowledge, they have product knowledge, et cetera, that then they can parlay into something different. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Other people go into banking, and approach it from that side. Occasionally, lawyers who are real estate attorneys ultimately get into the development or investment business, or go work for a developer or a fund, and then ultimately go to more to the principal side of things. Does that answer the
Okay.
question?
Yeah, yeah, that does make sense. Yeah, niche down in a certain aspect, and then you can broaden yourself
Yeah. I
after.
would also say to the niche part, if you're going to go into development or investment, I think it's important to have product type expertise. So really focus on some type of product, whether it's multifamily, office, industrial, retail, to start, and become an expert in that. And so then you create value for yourself and for others by having that expertise, and or become a market expert and really focus on a very well defined geographic niche and know everything about that market. So, really in real estate, I mean, what you have to sell, so to speak, is information, intellect, and, work ethic. So unless you have a whole bunch of your own money, then everyone wants to talk to you. But, generally it's just developing that expertise and intellectual capital that people see as having value.
Absolutely. So yeah, the way that I interpret that is basically you got to understand what the data is, and you got to put your own spin to it, right? Because you got to be able to communicate what you can do with that, right? Find a need, whether a good retail center might be good for that area, or a hotel or a new apartment building, right? And then
it used to be finding the data was very difficult, say 20 years ago. Now finding the data is not hard. It's everywhere. In fact, there's probably too much data. And so, as you've just suggested, it's really getting the right data and then interpreting that data in a way that maybe creates an opportunity that other people don't see on the surface.
Amazing. Yeah, that's incredible. Super cool. So, as I read the book by his name is he's the billionaire here in Miami Beach. He's a real estate developer. He has the Related Group.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Stephen Ross.
Stephen Ross, and then
Yeah.
his other partner is the other owner
Okay.
of the So he mentioned that basically when you're getting into development that you can make a 3 to 5x return in 4 to 5 years. Is that roughly what you can make, or?
I would say it depends on which part of the capital stack you're in. I would say typically for development, and again, it's also product type and risk of where you are in the cycle, but I would say typically on the capital side at the project level, the equity capital, the LP equity capital is looking for probably at the lower end a 1.5x return to say a 2 to 2.5x return. So that's a broad range, but at the developer level, because you're not putting up a lot of equity, you can get a 3 to 7x return. That's if you're doing a equity split with an LP partner where they're putting up, say, 90% of the equity, you're putting up 10% as the developer or investor, and then you're getting a construction loan or an acquisition loan that's somewhere in the, say, 55 to 60% of cost range.
Okay.
So you're really just leveraging, the developers is leveraging their time and limited capital off of other people's capital. And so the developer's time and expertise and sourcing the opportunity is what creates potentially an outsized reward for them. But they're also, keep in mind, there's a risk component because the developer frequently is providing guarantees, either loan guarantees or completion guarantees, which depending on how the project goes is a sizable risk.
Yeah, totally. Real estate development is the highest risk in the real estate sector, right? I mean, that's the most risk you could take, but it has the most rewards. What is it that you do to limit your risk, to limit your downside, from when you're working on a deal, so that you can be able to, get the deal completed and obviously pay everyone?
Yeah, I mean, you have to look at the different components of risk along the spectrum. And first of all, we do a tremendous amount of due diligence. We have usually great market knowledge, product knowledge, government knowledge of what the regulations are, et cetera, current cost information, current market rent information. So having all that information through the due diligence process and even before that, allows us to perhaps understand an opportunity better, which helps mitigate the risk. But if you look along the spectrum, there's risk at pre-acquisition before you buy the land, and so that's where you're investigating the physical nature of the site, the likelihood of government approvals, the potential cost of the project, the returns you're going to get, et cetera, along that spectrum. Once you close on the property, and we typically don't close until we have all government approvals. And in the markets we operate in California, getting the entitlements can be extremely challenging and expensive. So that's one of the highest risks, and we think we're very good at it. And so that part of it we're really vetting as to who the decision makers are, what the different regulations are, what's going to affect this particular property. And typically we're paying out of our own pocket for the entitlement process, and we don't have a third party investor at that point, like an LP or a lender. So that's one element of the risk spectrum is entitlements. And then once you get the entitlements, then there's potentially construction risk, and we try to mitigate that through doing GMAX contracts with general contractors that limit the potential cost overruns that we might have. And then you always have market risk, which is, can you lease the property once it's built? And that can be a big risk in the development business, because the development cycle can be at the shortest, probably 3 years and maybe up to 7 years. And so you have to have some fortitude to see, during that 3 to 7 year process and project out what you think is likely to happen during that time. And then things like COVID happen, which no one could predict, which had massive disruption, to the development process for most developers.
Yeah, that was unforeseeable. How did you handle that situation? How was the outcome of that? Like, what happened to you and your firm?
I'd say the biggest consequences of it were that initially we had a couple projects under construction, so there were construction delays because of government agencies, mainly health departments, were shutting down projects because they thought construction workers were going to, be subject to spreading COVID on the job site, et cetera. It's pretty hard to work from home when you're a construction worker. In most cases, the cities lifted those restrictions, but there was still fallout because people were getting sick, and you couldn't get full staffing on construction sites. And then there was also a lot of disruption to the supply chain and to logistics, and so materials were hard to get, prices went up. So basically everything became more expensive and took more time. And we all look back on it now like, you could have predicted what was going to happen or whatever. But as you know, everyone was fearful. They were scared. They didn't know what was going to happen. The world was going to shut down. And so you had to have some fortitude to kind of keep going. But it did cause delays, and it costs more money, I think, for almost every developer. And then also what happened on the capital side is investors weren't able to travel or weren't willing to travel. And so if you had a project in California and a lot of the investors are on the East Coast, they weren't going to come out and see a project if you had a potential new opportunity. So that kind of shut down the market for a while.
I see. I wanted to talk about the investor side, the capital side. So I don't want to make any assumptions, but I think you raise capital from investors. Is it retail investors, or is it institutional, or is it qualified purchasers?
So typically, our projects are large. So they're typically over $100 million, and so by that nature, we're raising equity capital from limited partners investors who are typically funds, insurance companies, and things like that. And typically we have one limited partner per project. So those limited partners are, typically not interested in putting up less than 30 or 40 million. And oftentimes, the bigger, the better. So if you have a $200 million project, you need, $80 to $100 million worth of equity.
Yeah.
That's on the LP side. On the general partner side or the sponsor side, in the last 7, 8 years, we have raised capital from individual high net worth investors and formed a fund for that purpose, and it gives them an opportunity to invest in a large commercial project that otherwise they would never have access to. And so
Yeah.
they make up part of our 10% of the equity. So if we're doing a 90-10 with an LP investor, then we'll use that co-general partner capital for a portion of that 10% of capital that the sponsor puts up.
Okay. Gotcha. And what is just curious, what is the typical return that you guys, or what's the waterfall structure? Like, I don't know, how do you compensate the people that put in money with you?
Yeah. It depends, I guess is the answer. There's no same formula for everybody. So it just
Mhm.
depends on kind of what that investor's hot buttons are. But in general, and the market's in flux right now because where interest rates have gone. But I'd say in general, for many years, the structure was a either 90-10 or 95-5 on the equity side, and then we would typically, or the project would pay somewhere between an 8 to 10% preferred return, and
Mhm.
then after that there were tiers of profit sharing or promote based on certain IRR or equity multiple thresholds, and those generally ranged from say 20% to the sponsor and 80% to the equity investor, up
Mhm.
to even 50% to the sponsor if it was really a home run project. But it was typically between like 20 and 30, 20 and 30%
Okay. Cool for the sponsor, and then
for the
rest
sponsor.
for
And then
the.
the LP equity is the balance.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
And that's
So,
generally the IRR would generally for the equity investors be somewhere between the mid-teens. This is levered IRR. It'd be somewhere between the mid-teens to the low 20% range. So call it 14 to 22%.
okay, I got it. Mid-teens to 22,
Yeah.
24%. Interesting. And so what would you say to someone that, is like looking to invest as a passive investor, as an LP in one of your deals, but it's also looking at other options. Like, what would make this investment be like a better outstanding investment, um, rather than other ones in their eyes, from your own words?
I would say first, second, and third is pick the right sponsor, right
Mm-hmm.
developer, right, person who's going to be the operator, uh,
Yeah.
before you even look at the project. Because you can make any project look good on paper. Not any, but a lot. Um,
Yeah.
and then I would look at the type of project. Do you understand it? Do you feel comfortable with it, both in terms of product type and market? Um, and is it something, some people have an investment philosophy that they don't want to invest in anything that they can't fly and see within 1 hour to maybe 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And so it depends on what your philosophy is there as to, whether you want to have some familiarity, be able to see and touch it, etc. And then obviously there's a capital threshold depending on how much you have to invest and the size of the opportunity that's out there, and, whether you want to diversify across multiple projects or not. And then also whether you think that sponsor can provide other opportunities to you in the future. So you don't necessarily have to recreate the wheel every time. A lot of large LP investors, they want to do repeat business with the same sponsors so that they have a comfort level, confidence level, and then also don't want to have to redo all the documents every time, which
Right.
can be expensive and time consuming.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so sponsor, whether you're able to see it, and then the third thing is whether you're able to do repeat business,
Yeah, and then also,
you
product type and geography, what someone's,
product type.
comfortable with.
Yeah. Awesome. That's great. I'm sure you've done a lot of hiring in your life. Hiring is a very, very important aspect of business. What are some tips you can give us about hiring? What do you look for? How do you spot the A players? All that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, clearly you're implying it's an art, not a science.
Mm,
And interestingly enough, I would say a lot of people that we've hired over the years, both in our current company and in Blake Hunt Ventures, came through referrals from people that we know, or people that we knew in the industry who then referred someone to us. So in most cases, it wasn't a cold call. We rarely use, talent agencies for that, unless it's for a very specific thing like some type of accounting position. Um, and then the other, intangibles we look for. I mean, it seems like it's pretty obvious. But
mm,
first of all, personality. Do you get along with the person? Do they appear to have, drive, work ethic? They're, a nice person. I read an article many years ago where someone said, "What's your hiring criteria?" Well, we hire nice people. That's it. And so, are they going to be team players? Do they have self-discipline? Can they communicate well? And you just get a feel for them as to whether they're going to be, a good fit or not. Um,
mm,
and so when we hire someone, I mean, my partner and I, we interview every single person after
mm,
they've been kind of gone through some initial level of screening, because you also want to talk to them about the culture of the company, the start of the company, the objectives of the company, and make sure they have a very clear understanding. We also like to hire people who are interested in a career, not a job, because you can hire anyone for a job, but we want someone who has a longer term vision, regardless of what their position in the company is.
That's interesting. Yeah, yeah, that sounds great. When you touch on culture, every company has its own culture. What is like? How have you made your culture? How's that culture in your company?
I think the culture really emanates from the beliefs, philosophy, practices, personality of the founders. And so both my partner and I, we're very team oriented, we're very communication oriented. Um, we have empathy for other people. We're willing to do any job and every job, and so I think people see that. It's a very flat organization. We're extremely accessible, both in person and primarily electronically these days, whether it's email, text, whatever. And we encourage people to communicate with us at any time. Not necessarily, they don't necessarily have to respond to us if we send them a text at 10 or 11 at nighttime just because we're thinking of something. But the mantra is everyone's available and everyone's open and honest about what they're doing.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. That is it's very heavily influenced by the founders for sure.
Yeah.
So.
And I think another thing is my partner and I, we understand everybody's job, and we've actually done that job probably at some level before. So we don't view ourselves as the CEOs that just sit in the corner and wait for people to come talk to them. So we dig in pretty hard. We go to city meetings when we're getting projects approved. We're meeting with capital partners. We're meeting with tenants on the retail side, whether that's a new tenant coming into a mixed use project, or in some cases a tenant that's having a problem that needs some help. We're meeting with contractors, everyone that's involved along the spectrum, and sort of no job is too big or too small for us. And I think people see that and they respect that.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm sure that's kind of like the leader who's working with their team, not just telling them what to do. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a big plus for sure. Amazing. So, on your perspective in the product knowledge, obviously, you do residential, mixed use, and retail. Um, what do you enjoy? Like creating the most. Like, I know there's different end users for each kind of project.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, when you're planning out these buildings, these structures, like how do you see the person that's going to be using them, eventually, like how do you make sure that that plan for their experience is the best.
Yeah. I think you've asked a few questions there, but a couple of answers. It differs from multifamily and retail. On the multifamily side, I think we are providing a much needed resource to the community because the areas we operate in, for the most part, have extreme housing shortages. And so we think we are helping to solve a social problem. Ultimately, unless you create supply, it's difficult to create more affordable type housing, whether it's truly affordable or whether it's just market rent affordable. So I think we like the fact we're providing a social benefit, and then also for an apartment project, you're designing everything up front before it's built, right? It's like your own house. You're picking light fixtures and flooring and counters and plumbing fixtures and appliances and amenities in the property, whether it's swimming pools, gyms, co-working areas, lobbies, lounges, etc. So that part's fun because it's very design oriented and it can be very creative. On the retail side, every single space is a different tenant, obviously, who has a different need and a different use, and so you're having to design it effectively as you go, and you're having to be responsive to tenants of all different levels of sophistication and resources. And the retail, I think, is fun because you're really creating something that's having immediate community interaction once it's done, right? Because people like new restaurants and new services and new stores, or a new grocery store, a new Whole Foods, whatever. So you can really see the direct impact and benefit on the community when you create that. And generally, on the government approval side, they like retail because one, it generates sales tax, and two, it can become a real amenity for the community.
Yeah, that is incredible. That's super interesting. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions on that topic. So on the multifamily side, you guys are building to rent, or you guys are building to sell, like condos?
Yeah, it's everything we've developed to date is built to rent. So we develop for rent Class A apartments in suburban infill markets.
Okay, gotcha. And usually, what is the price point like that you guys are looking to rent? One of these apartments when it's built.
I mean, obviously, it depends on the market, but in general, in the types of markets we're in, which are sort of higher education, higher income, higher employment areas, the rents are going to be, somewhere in the neighborhood of $3.50 to $5 a square foot. And so if, let's say, you have an 800 square foot apartment, someone might be paying, anywhere from $3,200 to $4,000 a month. And, that's mostly San Francisco Bay Area and infill parts of Southern California. We have another company called Opportunity Housing Group that acquires Class A apartments and converts them to moderate income affordable housing. And in those markets, obviously the rents are a lot lower because we're providing rents that are, in some cases 80% of what the area median income is. And so that might be, 20% less than what the market rents are. But I know
Okay.
depending on who listens to this, they hear, wait, apartment rents are, $3,500 to $5,000 a month. And they're saying like, who can afford that? Or why don't they
Yeah.
just buy a house? you know,
Right. Right.
but these
Yeah, but
are,
those.
they're Class A apartments that have
Yeah.
tremendous amenities, great locations, and they're in areas where it's really hard to build. And someone says, "Well, why don't you just buy a house?" Well, your mortgage is going to be, $8,000 to $10,000 a month, plus property taxes, plus insurance, plus all the upkeep. So, in most of the markets we operate in, renting is far more affordable and accessible than buying a house.
Yep. Yep. That makes total sense. Yeah, of course. And on the retail side, I mean, when you guys are building these properties, uh, do you guys go ahead and sign LOIs with the people who are going to be occupying? Like, and then I'm sure they fill you in and what they want the space to look like, or do they end up paying for their own tenant improvements and building out and all that stuff?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Yes, we sign. The process is typically you exchange proposals. Uh, it depends on the sophistication and size and nature of the tenant as to who initiates the proposal. A large chain tenant, they're going to send you the proposal. A mom and pop tenant, local, we're going to send them the proposal. You negotiate back and forth on the proposal. You ultimately sign an LOI. An LOI leads to a lease. And a big part of that LOI negotiation is the delivery condition the landlord is going to provide and the tenant improvement allowance the landlord is going to provide. Usually you get to terms on everything else very quickly.
Hmm.
Length of the lease, option payments, what the rent's going to be, all the other provisions, use provisions, etc. But the improvement part of it, particularly I'd say in the last 10 years, 15 years, has become massively different than it was when I first started in this business. When I first started for retail, you would build the tenant, what was called a vanilla shell, which or a white box. So the
Yeah.
walls would be up and sheetrocked. You'd have the drop ceiling. You'd have lighting fixtures in there. You'd have electrical outlets in the wall, and you'd put one or two bathrooms in, and you'd give it to the tenant, and they'd put flooring in and paint the walls, and they were ready to go. There wasn't a
Yeah.
lot of tenant improvement allowance. Then it shifted where if you had a highly desirable infill project, you could give the tenant a cold shell, which wasn't even a white box, right? It's just a concrete space or wood frame space with
Yeah.
very little tenant improvement. Uh, that shifted dramatically in the last 10 or 12 years. And now the landlord's having to deliver a very robust delivery condition, plus, depending on the type of tenant, particularly if it's a desirable restaurant, a very large tenant improvement allowance. So, whereas it went from a vanilla shell, which in today's world might cost, say, $100 a square foot to $125 a square foot, to
Hmm.
providing tenants with allowances that are $200 to $500 a square foot.
Yeah. Yeah. That is all. That's a big jump. There's more work, but you guys on the rent side, you guys are able to capture more rent because you guys are doing all this tenant improvements, right? Which
In
ends up.
in some cases, yes. In some cases, no. So
Mm,
if it's a highly desirable restaurant, that's the big numbers come from restaurants. So if
yeah.
it's a highly desirable restaurant with decent credit and great reputation and brand, you're not going to get that much more rent. And so where it used to be that your payback of rent to tenant improvement allowance for a restaurant might be 3 to 5 years, now it might be 7 to 10 years. So,
Ooh.
if
Yeah.
you think about it, if the tenant's paying, $60 a year in rent and you're giving them a $400 square foot allowance plus delivery condition, that's 6.5 years right there.
Yeah.
Um, so you have to have very good reasons to do that. And you also have to have access to capital to do that.
Yeah. That makes sense. Wow. Okay. Uh, cool. Super interesting to know. So when you're looking into, you know, this whole, I mean, you're the developer now, but like, what do you really enjoy doing? What is your like, you know, you really love doing in inside your, you know, your job, your company, you know,
Yeah.
like what what is
I
it
would
that
say it's probably three things. One is sourcing the opportunities, finding them, whether it's directly, whether it's through brokers, whether it's through other sources, sourcing the opportunity and then negotiating with the property owner to acquire the property. So
mm,
that's sort of, the creation of the opportunity to start. Two is,
yeah.
the design and creation of the product, working with our architects, with our leasing people, et cetera, to come up with the right product design, look, size, type of units, type of retail space, amenities, whatever it is. That's the true creative part of the business, and that's ultimately what you're going to see and what's going to be sort of the legacy of what's done. And then the third part I like is working with younger people and helping them learn, mentor them, learn from them as well, because they bring an expertise maybe in technology or use of AI or just a different view of the world than I might have from 35 years of experience, which comes from the questions when they ask, like, well, why do we do it that way? Why don't we do it this way? And you kind of think and say, that kind of makes sense. Let's give it a try. Um,
Yeah.
and so, I really enjoy that sort of teaching and coaching part of it as well.
That's awesome and amazing. And I didn't ask you, but and throughout your life, did you have mentors that you adhere to? Or how was mostly, you know, how did you learn? Was it through trial and error, or did you have a community of other real estate developers who were kind of mentoring you? Or, you know, what was kind of your upbringing in the real estate development space?
Yeah, so I had a number of mentors, but primary mentor was Ned Speaker, who was the one who hired me at Trammell Crow Company, and then founded Speaker Partners, and then ultimately Speaker Properties. And to come full circle, I've been working with Ned and his newest venture, which he's been doing for maybe 30 years actually, so maybe it's not that new, where he's doing senior housing.
Uh-huh.
And he called me a couple of years ago and asked if I could advise them on the mixed use retail component of that project. And the answer was yes, of course. So he was very instrumental in that mentoring, along with his two senior partners, Dennis Singleton and John French, back in the Trammell Crow Speaker Properties days. And then a lot of it's just been, learning by doing, observing, talking. There's a couple other developers who were, maybe 10 years older than me, who helped me along the way as a sort of senior peer,
Hmm.
as example, and we'd compare notes, etc. And then I'd say I'd also learned from a lot of my peers and partners at the different companies through just sharing of knowledge and information and kind of best practices.
Nice, nice. That's awesome. All right, so let's that's super cool. Uh, let's talk about the three aspects that you really like. So you sourcing the deal and negotiating the deal with the property owner. This is something that you know everyone in real estate you know has to do. You know,
Yeah.
finding the deal and so what are your tips on you know like sourcing the deal and negotiating? Do you like go direct to broker? Or do you go direct to seller? And then how do you negotiate something that you know actually works out? Like what are your strategies
Yeah.
and tips?
I'd say on the sourcing side, we do rely on brokers pretty heavily. Um, there is no scientific process, for doing it. When we look back to all the deals we've done and sort of how they got sourced, et cetera, there's a little bit of a pattern, but not much. I mean, I won't say it's random, but it comes from all different places. And some people we've known, for a long time, some people we don't really know. So that part's pretty interesting. We also sometimes will retain a broker and say, here's what we're looking for. Please go look for this on our behalf. And, you will represent us, in those transactions. That works
Mm,
probably better for when you're buying existing assets than when you're buying at a development opportunity.
mm,
Um, because with existing assets, there's an income stream. It's, easier to put a valuation on it. There's a transaction can close faster. You're not necessarily you have to go through the entitlement process, etc. We do some direct deals, um, not a lot. Some are indirect where we'll just hear about, oh, so and so's thinking about selling this, and then we'll call them. But we're not set up with a big team of people that's just going through property records and cold calling 100 people a day to see if they want to sell their property. Because if they really
gotcha.
don't want to sell, you're just going to pay way too much in order to
Right.
get them to sell. And so that's the process. And I'd say it's difficult when you're starting out, right? Because no one knows who you are and you don't have anything to show them. But once you've been doing it for a few decades, then people know who you are. You have a reputation. They see what you've done in markets. They like what you've done. Hopefully, they've heard good things, and so then sometimes that just reputationally will help generate opportunities. Like I'll have some people call me and say, "Oh, I know you developed this apartment project, here, XYZ, it's 200 units. I have this property, a few blocks away. Would you be interested?" So you get those kind of calls as well.
Yeah. Cool. And on the negotiating side of things, how do you usually negotiate a deal?
Again, that's definitely an art, not a
Yeah.
science.
Yeah.
So it depends on the deal and it depends on who the seller is, if you will. And
Mm,
so I think you have to be adaptable to the situation. In some cases, being sort of very, softer and friendlier is the right approach. In some cases, I won't say being tough, but being firm is what's required, based on the profile of the person. And then I'd say it's really most importantly to understand what their needs are and try to figure out how you can solve that problem or create an opportunity for them that maybe they didn't think existed in that manner. I'd also say we're very good at structuring kind of creative deal structures, both in terms of time, maybe deposits, other milestones, involvement of the seller along the way, doing property contribution joint ventures where certain sellers, given depending on what their tax situation is or whether they want to have long-term income as opposed to a quick sale. So we sort of listen to that, and we're very adaptable. We don't have any formula for how we do it. I'd say every property we've acquired, other than when it's an existing asset, um, and it's going to be a development project, is pretty unique each time. So there's no kind of standard template that we fall back on.
mm, okay.
Yeah,
Amazing.
and I think we're very direct and open with people we're buying something from. We're not playing any games. We're not trying to take advantage of them. We tell them what we can do and what we can't do, and then see if there's a meeting of the minds.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in some cases we're the second or third buyer in after they've failed with others. And we'll be sort of pretty direct, like, here's what we can do. We're not sure why your other deals fell apart, but if you're interested in getting it done, here's how it's going to get done. And maybe you have this wish list that you couldn't accomplish, with others, and maybe just the market won't respond to that. And
Yeah.
sometimes people get a reality check and say, okay, well, yeah, you're right. Let's get it done, done this way.
I gotcha. That makes sense. I like that. I like that. Here's what we can do. Here's what we can't do. This is how it's gonna get done. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really good. And you mentioned that you really like, mentoring, coaching, younger people. Usually, how do you go about doing that? Do you like mentor the people that are young in your organization, or do you have some other kind of
I
you
think
know?
there's a combination of I mean we don't have like a formal training program or anything, so it's more organic.
Mm,
Happens either through example, through working on a project, and saying, hey, maybe you could think about doing it this way, or have you thought about this? With with COVID and the not working from the office as much, I don't work for the office much at all anymore, and I've sort
yeah,
of gotten used to working from home, so to speak, or remotely.
yeah.
There's not as much opportunity for that, so it comes more through email exchange, phone calls, etc. And a lot of it's just by observation. So someone sees how you operate, what you did in a certain situation, and it's kind of learning, kind of learning that way.
Okay, I gotcha. Yeah, so I'm sure they probably reach out to you asking for advice, and you maybe entertain them, and that's how it goes, right?
Yeah, and I'd
Okay.
say I've mentored a fair number of people not in our company, that are either in the industry who contact me through someone we know or some other reason. I've taught courses a couple times at Stanford,
Mm,
and UC Berkeley as a guest instructor, and so you'll run into students there, who will reach out to you. Through the nonprofit I started, College is Real, we now have a lot of kids that they're not kids anymore, but they're out of college, they have careers, or many are in college, hundreds at a time, and some of them will be bold and they'll reach out to me and say, "Hey, I'm interested in this. Can you help me in this way?" And I love doing that.
that's amazing. I love it. Let's talk about that nonprofit that you started, the College is Here. What's the main intention behind that, and how's it going? How can someone get involved?
Yeah, it's a kind of a long origin story, which I won't go into here.
Yeah.
But to give you the highlights, we operate in Richmond, California, which is very underserved, lower income, kind of lower education, higher unemployment, higher crime community. And the objective mission of our program is to change the college going culture in the city of Richmond. And so
Mm,
we operate at Richmond's three public high schools, and we serve about 500 kids a year in high school and a few hundred kids that are in college. And for the kids in high school, we first of all help them believe they can go to college, because this is a community where a lot of the students, they don't believe they can go to college. They don't know anyone who's gone to college. It's just not part of the day to day culture there. So first of all, it's getting them to believe. That's part of the name. College is real, convincing them that it is real.
mm,
Two is then showing them how to do it, and that's both what courses do they need to take in high school, what grades do they need to get, if they need to take standardized tests, how do they do that? Encourage them to get involved in extracurricular activities, all of those things that help you have a good college resume or application resume. And then once they get to the college application process, we're very involved, very high touch, with helping them do their college applications, and then ultimately choosing a college. And then also we help them through the financial aid process. And once they get in college, we help them now get through college and graduate from college. So if someone wants to get involved, the website is collegeisreal.org. Very simple.
amazing, amazing. And what made you get started with this? Like what was your main, like, I guess, motivation, or you know like why do you do this? Like,
It came, I was a longtime youth soccer coach, and it came through a soccer game that happened between a school I was involved with and Richmond High School. And through that, I met the coach. and some of the players, and we decided we want to help them, in some other way. And as I was talking to the coach, he said, "Hey, we really don't need equipment and balls and uniforms and all that stuff because our program soccer is very successful." I said, "Well, what do you need?" And he said, "My kids need hope." And I said, "Wow, what does that mean? That's a big ask." And he said, "They don't have anywhere to go after high school." He said they go to high school basically to play soccer, and once they become seniors, a lot of them drop out, and they don't go on to any kind of educational aspiration or anything sort of beyond Richmond and working in a manual labor type job. And he goes, "I have a lot of kids who've had great potential, but it's too hard to get them there. There's no program that's really helping them get there." So I said, "Let's give it a try." We started with 15 boys on the soccer team, and I explained to them what I wanted to try to do. I said, "Hey, look, I'm not an educator. I'm not a teacher. I'm a coach, I'm a business guy, but I think you guys can apply what you learn in soccer and what makes you successful in soccer in terms of work ethic and listening to your coach and showing up for practice and working as a team, being self disciplined. We're going to apply that to school. And if you have a desire, I'm going to help you get there." And I said, "The only promise I can make is for you freshmen," and we just had freshmen and sophomores. I said, "For you freshmen, I will be here for 4 years. And hopefully you will be too." And I said to them, "I have one goal for this group, not for any one individual, but for this group, that 50% of you apply to go to college when you're seniors. I don't know which ones it's going to be, but that's it. Okay." And I knew if they applied, some of them would probably get in if we helped them and did the right thing. And so when those guys became seniors, all of them applied, all but one of them got in. And if you fast forward today, we have about 140 to 160 seniors a year that graduate from our program. We have, and depending on the year, we have a 95 to 100% college admission rate for that group, and we have a 90 to 95% college attendance rate. And this is in a community that has not had those numbers in the past.
Wow, that's amazing. You're yeah, you're making a real impact. That's incredible.
So, I mean,
Uh,
that program has more impact than any real estate project I could ever do.
yeah, that's amazing. I love that. And the satisfaction you get is being able to impact them, like pos
Yeah, I mean, at the very beginning, it was just me and 15 boys. And then eventually we, started hiring someone part-time director. Now we have a staff, 5 or 6 people, depending, full-time staff. They're on campus at the 3 high schools. Um, I've had a series of boys that I've mentored over the years. The most recent group is now about to graduate from college. I started with them when they were sophomores or juniors in high school, and my first group of mentees are in their mid 30s and are working in good jobs. And I still stay in touch with them, and like to see the kind of trajectory they've made in life.
That's incredible. I love that. Amazing. So, that's super cool. All right. Well, I think we've been here for about an hour, so I think it's time to wrap it up. What do you think is you know, what do you see as your legacy? Leaving in this planet. Like, what is it that you want to do?
Yeah, that's a big question, but I'd say my legacy, number one, is my family. Number two is probably the college is real program. And number three, from a business standpoint, is well, real estate, doesn't last forever. We think we're creating, physical assets, buildings, etc., that serve a community, provide a social good, and ultimately have benefit to society and those communities um, where we are.
Amazing, amazing. And where can people get in touch with you if they wanna
get involved with you in any type of form, whether it's, thank you for the knowledge shared, or, maybe they want to pursue, a job with you or get some advice from you, where is that the best way to get started
Sure.
with you?
Um, Two ways. Either go to our website, which is blakegriggs.com, or at the risk of getting inundated, maybe I'll give you my personal email, which is bblake, so BBLAKE, at Blake, BLAKE, Griggs, G as in George, RIGGS, and like Sam.com, bblake at blakegriggs.com. I respond to emails way better than I respond to phone calls. So, and
Okay.
I'm happy to help, but depending on what the ask is and how many asks there are, don't be offended if I say, I'm sorry, I can't really help you with that, or I don't have time right now, or maybe you should try, this way. But usually I'm pretty responsive and I like helping and I have a hard time saying no, which is maybe one of my faults.
Okay. Well, thank you. Really appreciate you, Blake. It's sorry, Brad. It's been Brad Blake.
No, and most people call me Blake because that's a more common name these days than Brad is.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So either way, then it's
Nice.
and me either way.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, yeah. Thank you so much for coming on, and we will be, you know, hopefully, looking forward to having you on in the future at some point, following up on your journey, and just seeing how things are going. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity. Congratulations on your podcast.
Thank you. Thank you, Brad. All right. Well, take care, and we will talk to you soon. Okay.
All right. Bye bye. Happy New Year.